Ancient Greek people had a distinct physical characteristics and also made observations about the physical appearance of the other civilizations, including the ancient Egyptians and Persians. Here is comparisons of how the ancient Greeks describe the physical appearance of these three civilizations. Ancient Egyptians. The ancient Greeks admired the ancient Egyptians for their intellect achievements, but they also described them in a way that reflected their physical appearance. The Greeks noted that the Egyptians had dark skin and curly hair, and they often depicted them as wearing head wraps. They also noted that the Egyptians had narrow eyes and long noses, which they considered to be unattractive. Persians. The ancient Greeks had a more negative view of the Persians compared to the Egyptians. They described Persians as having long flowing hair and beards, which they considered to be effeminate. They also noted that Persians had a tendency to be overweight and have large bellies, which they attributed to their luxurious lifestyle. Greeks. The ancient Greeks were proud of their physical appearance and believed that they had superior features compared to other civilizations. They often depicted themselves in art with muscular bodies, angular features, and symmetrical faces. They also valued physical fitness and athleticism, which is reflected in their Olympic Games. In summary, the ancient Greeks had different perception of physical appearance for each of these civilizations. They admired the Egyptians for their intellectual achievements, but found their physical features unattractive. They had a negative view of Persians and considered them effeminate and overweight. The Greeks had a more positive view of themselves and valued physical fitness and athleticism. Several ancient Greek writers and historians commented on the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians, including Herodotus. He was a Greek historian who traveled to Egypt in the 5th century BC and wrote extensively about ancient Egyptians. He noted their dark skin, curly hair, and narrow eyes, which he considered to be unattractive. Aristotle, he was a philosopher and naturalist who wrote about the physical appearance of various cult civilizations, including the ancient Egyptians. He described them as having long, thin bodies and noted that they had a tendency to be thin and weak due to their diet. Strabo, he was a Greek geographer who wrote about the physical appearance of various civilizations. He noted that the ancient Egyptians had dark skin and curly hair, and he also described their clothing and hairstyles in detail. Diodorus Siculus, he was a Greek historian who wrote about the ancient Egyptians in his work Bibliotheca Historia. He noted their dark skin, curly hair, and narrow eyes, and also described their clothing and jewelry. Plutarch, he was a Greek philosopher and historian who wrote about the ancient Egyptians in his work, the I don't know how to say that. He noted their dark skin, curly hair, and narrow eyes, and also described their religion and customs. Herodotus, Greek historian who lived in the 5th century BCE, wrote extensively about the ancient Egyptians. In his work, he wrote the Histories. In his writing, he provides detailed descriptions of the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians as he observed them during his travels in Egypt. Here is a summary of his observations. Skin color. Herodotus notes that the ancient Egyptians had dark skin color. He describes the complexion as being similar to the Ethiopians, a people from present-day Ethiopia and Sudan who he also observed during his travels. Hair. Herodotus also notes that the ancient Egyptians had curly hair, which he described as woolly in texture. He contrasts this with the straight hair of the Libyans, a people from present-day Libya who he also observed during his travels. Facial features. Herodotus describes the ancient Egyptians as having narrow eyes and a long flat nose. He notes that their eyes are often painted to make them appear larger. Clothing. Herodotus notes that the ancient Egyptians wore linen clothing that was often white in color. He also describes the elaborate hairstyles and headwear that they adorn themselves with, including wigs and head wraps. There we go. Skin color. In Book 2, the Histories, Herodotus writes that, and this translates, the Egyptians, all without exception, are black-skinned with woolly hair, which was the form of their hair. Hair. In Book 3, Chapter 10 of the Histories, Herodotus writes, and this can be translated as, their hair is curly and not straight, and the separate locks of hair tend to grow in circles like the tendrils of vine. Facial features. In Book 2, Chapter 89 of the Histories, Herodotus writes, the Egyptians have narrow eyes and long straight nose. Number 4, the Histories, Herodotus writes, whatever that meant. Okay, so who's the second guy that they mentioned? Aristotle. Aristotle, a Greek philosopher and scientist who lived in the 4th century BCE, did not write extensively on the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians. However, in his work, The History of Animals, he provides a brief description of their physical features. Here is a summary of his observations. Facial features. Aristotle notes that the ancient Egyptians had long faces and small eyes. He contrasts this with the physical appearance features of other peoples, including the Scythians and the Ethiopians. Physical features. Aristotle notes that the ancient Egyptians had a lean and muscular build, which he attributes to their diet and the climate of Egypt. He also notes that they were skilled swimmers and divers. Overall, Aristotle describes the physical appearance of ancient Egyptians is relatively brief and focuses primarily on their facial features and physique. His observations provide a valuable insight into how ancient Greek perceived the physical appearance of other civilizations, although it should be noted that the observations are limited and not necessarily representative of views of all ancient Greeks. Okay, well that's Aristotle. I guess we don't have to look any further. Let's look at Strabo. Wait, why does it write Strabo? I meant Strabo. Stupid. Okay, there we go. Strabo, a Greek geographer and historian who lived in the 1st century BCE, wrote about the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians in his work Geography. Here is a summary of his observations. Skin color. Strabo notes that the ancient Egyptians had a dark complexion, which he attributes to the hot climate of Egypt. Facial features. Strabo describes the ancient Egyptians as having narrow and oblong faces with high foreheads and straight noses. He also notes that they had thick lips and large mouths. Physical features. Strabo notes that the ancient Egyptians had a thin and wiry build, which he attributes to the diet and climate of Egypt. He also notes that they had a strong and sturdy physique, which he attributes to their hard work and laborious lifestyle. Overall, Strabo describes the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians is relatively detailed and provides valuable insight into the ancient Greeks' perceived physical characteristics. Okay, see. Strabo notes that the ancient Egyptians had a dark complexion, which he attributes to the hot climate. In the original Greek, Strabo states, Oh, this is long. Here is the 4 claims attributed to Strabo regarding the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptian skin color. Strabo notes that the ancient Egyptians had dark complexion, which he attributes to the hot climate of Egypt. In the original Greek, Strabo states that this translates to the Egyptians who live in the region are black due to the heat. Facial features. Strabo describes the ancient Egyptians as having narrow and oblong faces with high foreheads and straight noses. He also notes that they had thick lips and large mouths. In the original Greek, Strabo states that this translates to the people have long heads, narrow faces, straight noses, large mouths, and thick lips. Physical features. Strabo notes that the ancient Egyptians had a thin and wiry build, which he attributes to their diet and climate of Egypt. He also notes that they had a strong and sturdy physique, which he attributes to their hard work and laborious lifestyle. In the original Greek, Strabo states this that translates to their bodies are slim, supple, and athletic, reflecting the strength and established powers in which they appeared courageous due to their vigor and strength of their work. It should be noted that Strabo's writings, like much ancient Greek literature, is open to interpretation and translation can vary. Nonetheless, the 4 claims attributed to Strabo regarding the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians can be found in the original Greek text of his work. Okay, let's see who's the next one. Diodorus Siculus. Yeah, we gotta change that. Why is it writing Diodorus Siculus? Diodorus Siculus. Skin color. Diodorus Siculus notes that the ancient Egyptians had a swarthy complexion, which he attributes to the sun and the climate of Egypt. Facial features. Diodorus Siculus describes the ancient Egyptians as having sharp and thin faces with high foreheads and large, wide-set eyes. He notes that they had prominent noses and full lips. Physical features. Diodorus Siculus notes that the ancient Egyptians were a medium height and had a slender and spare build. He also notes that they had long fingers and toes and that their hair was generally black and curly. Waiting, waiting, waiting. Here are the original Greek passages from Diodorus Siculus that correspond to the three claims I mentioned in my previous answer. Skin color. Their complexion is swarthy because the sun, since the air in the country is warm and the sun is always shining strongly. Diodorus Siculus, Library of History, Book 1. There's the Greek. The second one, their faces are sharp and thin, their foreheads high, their eyes large and widely separated, their noses long, and their lips full. There's the Greek. As regard to their bodily frame, they are well adapted for hard work and can endure privations, being of medium height and spare in build with long fingers and toes. Their hair is generally curly and black. Diodorus Siculus. The ancient Greeks generally believed that the Ethiopians, a term used to describe various groups of sub-Saharan Africa, had more similar appearance to the ancient Egyptians than the Persians did. This belief is reflected in the writings of several ancient Greek authors. For example, in the histories, Herodotus wrote that the Colchians and the Ethiopians have thick lips, broad noses, woolly hair, and they are burnt of skin. Herodotus goes on to note that the resemblance of the Colchians and Egyptians is surprising, for if one were to paint the Colchians black, they would be indistinguishable from their Egyptians. Similarly, in his natural history, Pliny the Elder wrote that the Ethiopians are distinguished by their very curly hair and by their features, which are burnt as it were by the heat of the sun, and this is also the case with the Egyptians. It should be noted, however, the ancient Greek writers often used the term Ethiopian to describe a wide range of people from sub-Saharan Africa, and that their description of these people's physical appearance can vary widely depending on the context and the author. Yes, there are several ancient sources from the Middle East that describe the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians. One of the most notable is Amarna Letters, a collection of diplomatic correspondence between the rulers of Egypt, and various other Near East kingdoms. In one of the letters, the king Alashia, possibly Cyprus, describes the Egyptian envoy as having a nose like a beak of a bird of prey and skin like bronze. Similarly, the king of Babylon describes the Egyptian envoy as dark skinned and with the appearance of a Nubian. Other ancient Near East sources, such as the Hittite Annals and Assyrians' reliefs, also contain descriptions of physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians. These descriptions generally emphasize their darker skin tone and their distinctive facial features, such as their broad noses and prominent lips. It is worth noting, however, that these descriptions are often colored by their cultural and political context in which they were produced and may not accurately reflect the physical appearance and of the ancient Egyptians as a whole. Okay, let's see. It said planes above. This guy's thinking about planes. Here are examples of the original text that describe the ancient Egyptians in letters on Amarna. EA 41. Moreover, a man of Egypt came to my father's house. He had a nose like a beak of a bird of prey and skin like bronze. He said to my father, I will go and see the king. And my father said, do you please? I have received the envoy of Egypt who is dark skinned and has the appearance of a Nubian. He brought me a message from the Pharaoh. There are just a few examples, and there are many other texts from the ancient Near East that describe the physical appearance of ancient Egyptians in similar terms. Why is it showing Herodotus? I'm gonna leave it in because it's obsessed. Okay, let's see. 10 more examples of the Middle East texts that discuss the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians. From the Mari letters, the envoy of Egypt is here. He has the skin like bronze hair, like a horse tail, and a nose like a bird's beak. From the El Amarna letters, the envoy of Egypt has arrived. He is skin like a Nubian and appearance of a soldier. From the Merneptah Stellae, the chief of Libya is brought captive with his 2 brothers, his wife, his children. The chief of Egypt is overthrown in his palace, and the foreigners are burnt like chaff. Number 4, from the Ipuwer papyrus, the land is without light. The children of prince are dashed against the walls. The face of the sky is in turmoil. What? From the book of Exodus, and it came to pass at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, from the firstborn Pharaoh that sat on the throne unto the firstborn on the captives of the dungeon. From the Admontius, the river is blood, the land of uproar, the children of princes are cast on the streets. He saw an Egyptian woman of extraordinary beauty, with skin as dark as ebony and eyes as bright as the stars. From the Book of the Dead, I am Osiris, the Lord of eternity, the King of the dead. My skin is black and my hair is like wool. From the Papyrus Harris, the King of Egypt is wise and just, with skin like bronze and eyes like the sun. From the story of Sinai, I fled to the land of Cush, where I was treated as a prince. The people there are dark-skinned and fierce, with hair like wool and noses like eagles. Let's try one more. It is difficult to give definitive answers to this question, as the views of people in the Middle East who were contemporaries of the ancient Egyptians would have varied depending on their specific cultural historical context. In some cases, the ancient Egyptians and Nubians who lived in what is now Sudan were seen as distinct group with their own unique physical characteristics. For example, in El Amarna letters, an Egyptian envoy is described as having skin like a Nubian. Similarly, in the Tale of Sinai, the protagonist describes the people of Cush, a region that included Nubia, as having dark skin and wool-like hair, which implies that he saw them as physically distinct from himself and other Egyptians. In contrast, the ancient Greeks and Romans were often seen as more similar to the ancient Egyptians in terms of their physical appearance. For example, in the histories, Herodotus writes that Egyptians and Greeks were similar in appearance and notes that the Greek god Apollo was sometimes depicted with Egyptian hair. Similarly, the Roman historian Tacitus wrote that the Egyptians and the Romans were similar in physique and noted that some Egyptians had blonde or red hair, which he saw as evidence of their connection to the Roman people. That's interesting. Let's see. So that's Tacitus. There we go. I thought so. Let's read it out. Tacitus does not specifically say that the ancient Egyptians and Romans had red or blonde hair. However, he does make a general statement about the physical appearance of the Egyptians in his work Histories, which was written in Latin in 1st century CE. He is a quote from Book 2, Chapter 81, translated into English. The Egyptians, though close to the Ethiopians, resemble the rest of mankind. Their country, climate, and soil produce, as I imagine, a black and oily seed from which the hair, as it grows, acquires its dark color and unctuous quality. It's worth noting that Tacitus' statement is somewhat ambiguous and could be interpreted in different ways. Some readers have taken his use of the word imagine to suggest that he is speculating rather than stating a fact, while others have seen his mention of the Egyptians' proximity to Ethiopia as evidence that he saw them as distinct and non-European people. However, there is no explicit mention of red or blonde hair in this passage or elsewhere in Tacitus' writings about the ancient Egyptians. I thought so. One more. Let's see, is there anything else that I'm missing? Yes, it is fair to say that the ancient Greeks did not describe the ancient Egyptians as having light skin in the sense of the people of the. Yes, it is fair to say that the ancient Greeks did not describe the ancient Egyptians as having light skin in the sense of the people from the Middle East or Europe. Instead, they generally depict them as having dark skin tone. For example, Herodotus described the Egyptians as skin burnt by the sun, dark skin in his Histories. Similarly, Diodorus Siculus writes that the Egyptians had swarthy skin in his Library of History. It's worth noting, however, that these descriptions are somewhat subjective and reflective of biases and cultural norms. Now that made me more curious. Okay, let's see. The ancient Greeks used different words to describe the skin color of the Egyptians, but some common terms include melas, which means black or dark, and anthrakinos, which means coal black. For example, Book 2 in the Histories of Herodotus uses the word melas to describe the skin color of the Egyptians. Here is the Greek original. In this passage, melanis is the plural form of melas and is translated as black in the English translation. Similarly, in Book 1 of his Library of Histories, Diodorus Siculus uses the word anthrakinos to describe the skin color of the Egyptians. Here is the Greek original. In this passage, anthrakinos is plural form of anthrakinos and is translated as coal black. Yes, there are few instances in Greek history where the ancient Egyptians were described as coal black. For example, in the works of the Greek historian and geographer Strabo, he describes the Egyptians as having thick lips, woolly hair, and they are of black color. Similarly, the Greek historian and biographer Plutarch wrote in his work Isis and Osiris that the Egyptians are black with heat of the sun. It is important to note, however, that I am not aware of any Greek. Okay, we've reached the limit. The term Afrocentrist refers to cultural political ideology and emphasizes the contribution of African people to the world of the blah 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 blah. It is true that some Greek historians describe the ancient Egyptians as having features that are commonly associated with people of African descent. It is not accurate to describe these historians as Afrocentrists. The ancient Greeks were simply observing and describing what they saw when they encountered people from different parts of the world, including the ancient Egyptians. It is important to note that the ancient Greeks did not have modern concept of race or ethnicity, and the description of physical features should be understood in their historical and cultural context. Furthermore, it is important to note that not all ancient Greek historians describe the ancient Egyptians in the same way. There were variations in the way that different writers describe the physical appearance of ancient Egyptians, and these descriptions were influenced by the various factors. Ha! Let's see. Aristotle, in his Politics, described the Libyans as having black skin and woolly hair. He notes that the Libyans were a nomadic people who lived in tents and were skilled in horsemanship. It is important to note that these, okay, I think that's enough.